It's funny how the smallest things can break even the strongest family bonds. For me, it wasn't a wedding drama or an inheritance dispute. It was a garden. My mother-in-law Margaret's precious, award-winning garden. I'd known from the day I married David that his mother was particular about her roses. The entire neighborhood knew about Margaret Chen's prized garden, with its perfectly manicured bushes and carefully color-coordinated flower beds. She'd won the local gardening competition 5 years running, and those victory plaques hung proudly in her sunroom, polished weekly until they gleamed. "Now, Ellen," she'd said to me right after the wedding, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I know you're used to simpler things, but in this family, we have standards to maintain." The way she looked at my modest apartment's potted plants made it clear what she thought of my gardening abilities. That was 8 years ago. Since then, I'd given birth to twins, Amy and Lucas, now 7. David had passed away 2 years ago in a workplace accident, leaving me to raise our children alone. Margaret had been, well, marginally supportive. She'd show up unannounced with casseroles and unsolicited parenting advice, never failing to mention how she'd raised David properly as a single mother after her husband died. "Your children need structure, Ellen," she'd say, watching Amy and Lucas play in our backyard. "They're so energetic. David was never like that." The comparison was always there, hanging in the air like an unpleasant smell. I tried to maintain the peace for David's sake, even after he was gone. The kids loved their grandmother, despite her rigid ways. Every Sunday, we'd go to her house for dinner, and the twins would beg to play in her garden. Margaret would always refuse, citing the delicate nature of her plants. "These roses are prize winners," she'd say, shooing them away from the flower beds. "They're not meant for children's games." But last month, something changed. The twins had been oddly secretive, spending hours in our backyard with their grandfather, my dad, Tom. He'd been helping me with the kids since David died, becoming the father figure they desperately needed. "It's a surprise project," Amy would say, her eyes twinkling with excitement whenever I asked what they were doing. "You'll see, Mommy," Lucas would add, dirt smudge across his cheeks, but grinning from ear to ear. I trusted my dad, so I let them have their secret. Besides, anything that kept them busy and happy was fine by me. They even started reading gardening books, which amazed me. My wild, energetic twins suddenly interested in botany. Then came that fateful Sunday dinner at Margaret's. The twins had been antsy all afternoon, whispering to each other and giggling. I should have known something was up. "May we please see your garden, Grandma?" Amy asked after dinner, using her best manners. Margaret seemed surprised by the formal request. "Well, I suppose you can look, but no touching anything." The kids rushed outside, with Margaret following closely behind. I helped clear the table, but the peace lasted barely 5 minutes before I heard the screaming. "Wait, are you doing? Get away from there." I ran outside to find Margaret's face purple with rage. The twins were kneeling by her prized rose bushes, their hands in the soil. "Mom, we're just..." Lucas started to explain, but Margaret cut him off. "Look at this mess. You've ruined everything." She pointed to the disturbed soil around her roses. "These are award-winning specimens. They're not toys for destructive children who don't understand their value." Amy burst into tears, and Lucas's lower lip trembled. My blood began to boil. "Margaret, they were only... I want them out of my garden. Out, and don't come back until they learn some respect." She grabbed both children by their arms, pulling them roughly to their feet. That was it, the last straw. "Don't you dare manhandle my children," I said, my voice deadly quiet. The tone made Margaret freeze. "Take your hands off them. Now." She released them, and they ran to me, burying their faces in my sides. "Well, I never," Margaret huffed. "In my day, children knew their place. David would be ashamed to see them acting like this." The mention of David's name made something snap inside me. "No, Margaret, David would be ashamed of you right now. Kids, show Grandma what you were doing." Amy pulled out her phone, a recent birthday gift she'd been using to document their secret project. With trembling fingers, she pulled up a series of photos. "We wanted to surprise you, Grandma," Lucas said softly. "We've been practicing with Grandpa Tom." The photos showed our backyard transformed. The twins had created a beautiful memorial garden, with roses identical to Margaret's prize winners. The final photo showed a handmade plaque, "In memory of Dad, his love blooms forever." We wanted to learn how to grow roses like you, Amy explained, wiping her tears. So we could make a special place for Daddy. Grandpa Tom helped us learn everything about roses. We were just checking your soil because ours isn't growing as well. Margaret's face went from purple to white in seconds. She stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, as the full impact of what she'd done sank in. I didn't. Save it, I said, gathering my children close. We're leaving, and this time, we won't be back. As I led the twins to the car, I could hear Margaret calling after us, her voice breaking. But some things, once broken, take more than apologies to fix. Like trust, like family bonds. Like a child's innocent desire to connect with their grandmother through something she loved. Like roses, relationships need careful tending. But unlike roses, they can't simply be pruned and shaped to someone else's standard of perfection. Sometimes they have to be allowed to grow wild and free, even if that means breaking the carefully maintained order of a prize-winning garden. The next few weeks were harder than I expected. The twins threw themselves into their memorial garden with renewed determination. But I could see the hurt in their eyes. Every evening, they'd water their roses and check the soil, their little faces serious as they referenced the gardening books spread out on our patio table. Mom, Lucas asked one evening, his hands deep in the soil, why doesn't Grandma Margaret love us like Grandpa Tom does? The question hit me like a physical blow. Amy stopped pruning her rosebush, waiting for my answer. How do you explain toxic perfectionism to 7-year-olds? It's not that she doesn't love you, I said carefully, sitting down on the garden bench. Sometimes we get so focused on things being perfect that we forget what's really important. Like her prize roses? Amy asked, wiping dirt from her cheek and leaving a bigger smudge. Exactly like that. Margaret had been calling daily, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I deleted them without listening. She'd even tried sending elaborate flower arrangements to our house. I donated them to the local hospital, but it was her latest attempt at contact that really got under my skin. She cornered my dad at the grocery store. You have to help me, Tom, she pleaded, according to him. You're teaching them gardening. You understand how delicate those roses are. Surely you can see why I was upset. Dad, bless him, had just shaken his head. Margaret, I've been teaching those kids about a lot more than just gardening. Every plant needs room to grow, even if it grows a little differently than you expect. Your son understood that. Maybe it's time you learned it too. He told me this over coffee one morning after helping the twins with their daily garden maintenance. The kids were inside getting ready for school, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. Dad, I don't know what to do, I admitted. Part of me wants to protect them from her perfectionism, her constant criticism, but another part wants them to have a grandmother who loves them for who they are. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Ellen, you're doing the right thing. Sometimes people need to lose something precious to understand its true value. The irony of his words hit home a few days later. I was helping Amy document the growth of their roses for her science project when Lucas came running from the front yard. Mom, come quick. Grandma Margaret is crying on our porch. Sure enough, there she was, the immaculate Margaret Chen, sitting on my porch steps, her usually perfect makeup streaked with tears. When she saw us, she stood up quickly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Ellen, she started, then stopped when she saw the twins half hidden behind me. Amy, Lucas. What do you want, Margaret? I kept my voice neutral, conscious of the children watching. I lost the garden competition, she said, her voice breaking. First time in 6 years. The judges said my roses looked. They said they could tell my heart wasn't in it anymore. She pulled something from her designer handbag, a small photo album. I've been looking at these old pictures, she continued, opening the album with shaking fingers. David, he used to help me in the garden when he was their age. He wasn't perfect at it. He'd often pull up flowers thinking they were weeds or overwater the seedlings. But he loved it. He loved learning about it. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that's what matters. The twins peered around me, curiosity overtaking their caution. Margaret knelt down, holding out the album. Would you like to see pictures of your daddy when he was your age? He had dirt on his face just like you do, Amy. Amy touched her smudged cheek self-consciously but took a tentative step forward. Did Daddy really help in your garden? Lucas asked, his voice small but interested. He did. And he made plenty of mistakes. But you know what? Those mistakes helped make the garden stronger. Just like, she looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Just like my mistake with you might help make our family stronger. If you'll give me another chance. I felt my dad's words echo in my mind. Sometimes people need to lose something precious to understand its true value. Would you? Margaret's voice faltered, then strengthened. Would you show me your memorial garden? I'd like to see what you've been learning from Grandpa Tom. The twins looked up at me questioning. I nodded slowly. You can show her, I said. But remember what we learned about gardens. They need tender, loving care. Emmy announced proudly. And patience, Lucas added. Sometimes plants take time to bloom. And sometimes grandmothers do too, I said quietly, meeting Margaret's eyes. She flinched slightly but nodded, understanding the message. As we walked to the backyard, I watched Margaret take in the sight of our memorial garden. It wasn't perfect like hers. Some roses were slightly lopsided, and the rows weren't exactly straight. But every plant had been placed with love, every bloom tended with care. We used Daddy's favorite colors, Amy explained, pointing to the different varieties. And Grandpa Tom taught us about companion planting. See these marigolds? Lucas piped up. They protect the roses from bad bugs. And we made sure everything is bee-friendly, Amy added. Because Daddy always said we should help the bees. I saw the moment Margaret truly understood. She stood there, looking at this imperfect but thriving garden, created by her grandchildren in memory of her son. And finally, she saw beyond the crooked rows and uneven blooms to the love growing wild and free in every flower. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from broken ground. In the months that followed Margaret's tearful visit, our family began to heal, slowly, carefully, like tender shoots reaching for the sun. It started with small changes. Margaret asked if she could come by once a week to help with the memorial garden. The first few visits were awkward, filled with careful politeness and hesitant conversations. But then came the morning when Amy accidentally overwatered a rose bush. Oh no, Amy cried, expecting criticism. But Margaret surprised us all. You know, she said, kneeling beside her granddaughter, your father did the exact same thing when he was your age. Want to know what we did to fix it? That was the turning point. Suddenly, every gardening session became story time. Margaret would share memories of David as a child, and the twins soaked up every word. They learned that their father once planted a whole row of roses upside down, convinced the flowers would grow toward Australia. How he'd named each of his mother's rose bushes after superheroes. How he'd insisted on wearing his Superman cape while gardening. Your daddy wasn't perfect, Margaret told him one afternoon as we all sat on the patio, drinking lemonade after a morning of gardening. And it took me far too long to realize that perfect isn't what matters. What matters is the love you put into growing things, whether it's flowers or family. I watched her with the twins, noticing how she no longer flinched when they got dirt on their clothes or made mistakes with the plants. Instead, she turned each mishap into a teaching moment, just as she had with David all those years ago. One Saturday morning, about 6 months after the incident, Margaret arrived with a special surprise. She carried a small, rather scraggly-looking rose bush in a pot. This, she announced, was your father's first rose. He planted it when he was 8 years old. It's never won any competitions. Look how crooked it grows. But it's been blooming faithfully for 25 years. The twins stared at the plant in awe. Can we plant it here, in Daddy's garden? Lucas asked hesitantly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I think that's exactly where it belongs. We planted it together, all 4 of us getting our hands dirty. As we worked, I noticed something remarkable. Margaret's own hands, usually so pristine, were covered in soil, and she didn't seem to mind at all. You know, she said as we patted down the soil around David's old rose bush. I've been thinking about next year's garden competition. Are you entering again? I asked, curious about her tone. Actually, she smiled, looking at the twins. I thought we might enter together. As a family, this garden, it's taught me more about love and growth than all my prize winners ever did. Amy and Lucas's faces lit up. Really? We can help. Help? My dears, you'll be my head gardeners. Every champion needs a strong team. That evening, after Margaret had gone home and the twins were in bed, I sat in the memorial garden, watching the sunset paint the roses in shades of gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Thank you for giving me a second chance to grow into the grandmother they deserve. I looked at David's old rosebush, its quirky, crooked stems somehow perfect among the other flowers. Like us, it didn't need to be flawless to be beautiful. It just needed room to grow and love to bloom. A year has passed since then. Our blended garden didn't win the local competition. We came in third. But the sight of Margaret beaming proudly as the twins accepted the bronze medal, dirt under their fingernails and joy in their hearts, was worth more than any first-place trophy. Every Sunday now, we still have dinner at Margaret's house. But instead of being confined indoors, we eat in her garden, which has changed as much as she has. Between the perfect competition roses, you'll find patches of wildflowers planted by the twins. There's a fairy garden in one corner, slightly messy but magical, and in the center, a new plaque reads, "In every garden, love grows wild and free." David would have loved it, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Because in this garden, just like in our hearts, his memory continues to grow, nurtured by the love between a grandmother and her grandchildren, who finally learned that the most beautiful blooms often come from unexpected places. Last week, I overheard Lucas telling a friend, "Our grandma taught us that gardens are like families. Sometimes they're messy, sometimes things don't grow exactly how you planned, but if you tend them with love and patience, they turn into something amazing." Out of the mouths of babes, as they say, or in our case, out of the hearts of young gardeners who help their grandmother's love bloom in new and wonderful ways.